A writer will leave his home, his family, his environment, or as Käfer said, you had a life you left behind, but you leave something else behind, probably your tool you work with, your language. You go into a different country as a writer without a language or not, or is it easy to take over a different language? Everything we know about authors in exile is very rarely so. A few write not in a new language. Usually takes 1 or 2 generations when members of the next generation start to write in new language. And if we, the receiving countries, receive these artists and writers, we use them, they should not only tell us their stories, but we expect them to be political correspondents, to explain their country, their culture, to explain who else came here as refugees, who are these people, what they mean for this new country. They should explain everything, but they cannot be what they want to be a writer and tell the stories they would like to tell us. And there are further questions for whom this writer tells the stories, for if he speaks for him or on behalf of his group, and does he even want it? And if this author would be read as Käfer to write columns which are then translated, for whom does she write this? For other refugees, seeing the world as she does, people of her language, or for others? This is just a brief sketch of the questions we ask ourselves on this panel when language is left behind. And we would like to welcome, and I'm very happy that Najet Adouani is here from Tunisia. And I'm afraid of the next name, Zmicier Vishniou from Belarus. Warm welcome. Jordi Puntí from Spain. And Josef Haslinger from Austria. And the panel will be moderated again by Thomas Böhm. Thank you. Thank you indeed. Well, I just heard in the first panel the volume wasn't loud enough, so I trust on this fundamental democracy. If the volume is not loud enough, please shout louder in whichever language you like. If language is left behind, this is the topic of our panel discussion. And I would like to quote a few exiled writers. There's a bitter experience to be separated from the lively flow of your native tongue. Leon Feuchtwanger.
I had better tell you where I got my English from. Answer in 2 words from Hitler. Werner Landsburg. Das Leben zwischen
To live between 2 languages is difficult and tiresome, but those who have lived through this one would never return to their mother tongue, behind which there is no single country. Jean Amaury. We traveled from language to language and had to earn our life in each of them. If you are fortunate, you find a second fatherland, but you will find a second language. Can you ever forget your mother tongue? Or can you have 2 languages, 2 mothers? Klaus Mann. And last but not least, you can leave a country, but never your own language. Shalom Ben-Kurin. To leave your country, to flee your country, does not only mean that you lose your home, but also your language. For whom do you write when you leave? This is the guiding question of our panel. The writer and journalist Najet Adouani said me yesterday evening when we talked, he said something very beautiful. She has been living in Germany since 2013 as the guest of the Writers in Exile program of the PEN, which we'll present later. And she said, I'm writing for all. Does it mean that your writing hasn't changed because of your position? You're writing for all?
Thank you. Yes, when we take language as a tool of connection, I have no problem, because I write to everybody and everywhere and outside times and places. But I want to say something. Me, I lost my language, my native language, before I come to this world, because I'm from Tunisia and my family Amazigh, Berberian, and I knew with my grandmother the native language and the real civilization of my people. And at the age of 14, after my mother leaving, I discovered that language is only a way to connect with the other. That's why it is no problem. But there is another side too. I lost my language twice when I started to write in Arabic, and in Tunisia, before Tunisia of Bourguiba, after the independence. French language was the main language in Tunisia, in schools and everywhere. And you can't find Arabic. I studied Arabic like language, 2 hours a week. Mm-hmm. And that, I didn't like that, because when the language become something dominate you from outside in your place, it is not really a tool of connection. It is something of those things lost by France, which that time didn't left really. And that made me think, and even I wrote some articles that why we use French language. We are not French. We can use it like language as any other language, like English, like German, like Japanese, like any other language. But when it comes, the main language there, and in streets and everywhere, it is too much. It is an identity for the people there. But outside that, I have no problem with the language. There is another thing. Now I talked about the past. We talk about now. I'm here. And with a new language, the German language, and I started to study. I made progress in my course. You said that. And I wish one day I can write in German. I will not write novels or short stories or poems, but I can connect, I can write small things. It is okay for me. Besides that, Arab language here, a lot of people came to Germany and they are Arabic. And I started to see many Arab things here. Many people started to make a radio for refugees, and in Arabic, I listened to that. There is some clubs, it started to hear the Arab language. But for me, always the language stay a tool of connection. I write in English or in German or in French or in the good thing for me is to reach the reader everywhere and to say what I want. And that's why translators for us, they are our horses who run towards taking the text to the other. Without them, we can't reach the reader. There is something else about the Arab language, and the people who write in Arabic, they can't publish their books in Arabic in Europe, and that makes them far away from some important prizes, some important events. If there is no translator, there is no publishing house accept that book, and that is a problem. For example, the prize of Nobel, there is a lot of Arab writers, they want to go there by their Arab books, and right now it is impossible for them because they need to be known by translated books, not by their books in Arabic. Yeah. Now, your question is okay. Yeah.
Wir werden gleich noch
We'll come back to this question. What Josef Haslinger said to Najet Adouani, we will leave open, and we will also meet one of the horses. But first, I would like to ask Zmicier Vishniou. He knows this topic from various perspectives. He is a writer, performance artist, literary critic, and program director of the literature magazine Texty. His novel, The Nettle House, describes the house Tacheles, where he was present and as a Tacheles scholarship. And since 2007, he has been the head of the independent publishing of Galiafi. And when we met yesterday, he said just the contrary of what we heard. Of writing, I'm writing for everybody. He said, you only write for yourself. Could you please explain what you mean by that?
Прежде всего я хочу поблагодарить за общаюсь.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I write in Belarus. I usually use it as a means of communication, but today I'll try to speak Russian. I believe, which I've always said, that a writer creates his work only for himself, and then he decides whether to present it to the broader public or not. But if he's doing this right from the beginning, if you want to be a serious writer, if you try to write for your readers, I think it would be a fraud, and you would disguise yourself. It would be wrong. And I think you shouldn't confuse literature with journalism, because literature is not just interacting with the reader. You play with words. If you take Nabokov, for example, or something special, it is not just technical writing or simple interaction with your audience. If you want to read Shakespeare, for example, or Vasily Bukow, you want to read it in the original because in the original there are interesting wordplays, which is very important. Today we've been discussing refugees, immigrants, and in the 1930s, in the literature in Belarus, the whole intelligentsia was killed. More than 300 writers writing in the Belarus language, and I thought it would be great if they had been refugees. Then we might have kept a lot of our culture, and then it would not only be, this culture would not only be preserved for the readers in Belarus, but it would have been very valuable for all. And that is very important. What else could I add? If we work with language, if we take Belarusian literature, there are not many writers who are refugees. Our political situation in Belarus is very difficult, to put it mildly, and we rather leave the country than receive refugees. And this is now my approach as an editor, a publisher. We publish books of those who have left the country, but they still continue to write in their own language, and they write for the Belarusian reader, even though there are some exceptions, such as Vishniou, who writes in English. You might name a lot, but you all don't know them because they were simply not translated into German or English. Thank you. Later, we will come back to publishing exile literature. Now, I would like to ask Jordi Puntí. He's a writer and journalist, and if I see, am I right, the only translator on this panel. He translated Nathalie Defont and Paul Auster into the Catalan language. When we talked about the question of changing languages, for whom do you write? Which language do you leave behind? He added a category which is sometimes forgotten, which is the cosmopolitan aspect.
Yeah, the cosmopolitan approach, it's very interesting. But anyway, I would like first, we can talk about that later. I would like, because I'm an expert in the art of contradiction, especially contradicting myself. I agree with everyone. I agree that you write for yourself, but also you write for everyone. And actually, I would add that when you write for the past and you write for the future, and for the present, of course, but this is obvious. You write for the past because you are part of a tradition. You write for the future because you want to be part of the tradition at the same time. And I was thinking about that this morning, talking about refugees and especially refugees writers. I write in Catalan. I write fiction in Catalan. I write my non-fiction art journalism in Spanish. And I usually have the feeling of a normality, that I write in a language that is very normal, has a number of readership, quite big, has publishers, everything. It doesn't have a state behind, which makes it a bit weird. And but anyway, I feel part of this tradition. But Catalan language was a banned language from 1939 till 1975, the Franco dictatorship years. A few years ago, when I was a teenager, I was, looking at my parents' stuff, and one day I found this postcard that my father had sent when they were not married yet, when they were lovers. He had sent this postcard to my mother, and he was telling him about holidays and all that, and it was written in Spanish, and they were both Catalan speakers. And but they were forced to write in Spanish because, of course, it was a postcard, and if the postman says it is in Catalan, they can be be, denounced and all that. So they had to write it in Spanish, and I was really shocked. I thought, how can you tell your love to someone in a language that is not yours? And I asked my father, and for him it was perfectly normal. He didn't have, because they didn't have Catalan in the schools, and for them Catalan was, the language of the street. It was not the language that you could speak, but not that you could write. And they actually never wrote in Catalan. Now, at the same time, in the early 1940s, a lot of Catalan writers went abroad, were in exile, were refugees at one point. They went to France, then they moved. Most of them went to South America, to Mexico, to Dominican Republic, to Chile, and they kept writing in Catalan. They kept writing for no one, actually. I'm saying they were writing for the future, because they knew they were not able to be published. They had, these small publisher houses in Mexico or in Chile, but of course they were published only for their friends. This 40 years it took them to see their works published in a normative. Most of the cases, they were already dead. And there were also the interior exile that we call, the people who stayed in Barcelona, that they kept writing in Catalan, but they couldn't publish. But they end up publishing afterwards. So nowadays, when I write in Catalan in a very normal way, I'm deeply gratified to these people, because they somehow kept the flame of the writing, of the language. So I think while they were writing in these very poor conditions, why were they doing it in their own language? Why they didn't change to another language? They knew Spanish. They lived in countries where Spanish was spoken, and sometimes they were even part of the the Mexican culture or the Chilean culture, and they were writing pieces in the newspapers and all that. But they kept writing in their own languages. So when, sometimes my books I write in Catalan, they are published in Catalan and in Spanish at the same time. And so I do the promotion, I go to the rest of Spain, and I go to Madrid, Sevilla, all that. And sometimes I get the question, why do you write in Catalan? Why don't you write in Spanish? If it's, I'm bilingual, I could write in both languages. And my impulse is to say, well, I write in Catalan because it's my language, it's the one that I know best. But also, sometimes I think I write in Catalan for those people who for 40 years were writing in a language that no one could read. And that's the important part, probably. So when I write, I think I write for the past and for the future. So, but then we can talk about other stuff.
Dankeschön. Josef Haslinger ist Schriftsteller, er ist Professor.
Josef Haslinger, you're a writer, you're a professor in Leipzig, you are president of a German Pen Center, and Writer in Exile is a very important program that you accommodate. So Najet Adouani is a guest in that program, as we've heard before. So, of course, there are individual cases, individual people who are your guests, and they come with their individual problems, for sure. But how are you trying to support the authors that come to you? First of all, let me say this. The German Pen Center has been operating this program since 1999. It started under Michael Naumann. And it was systematically developed. For a couple of years, we have been able to accommodate 8 authors from all over the world for 3 years in Germany. So we are offering them a secure home, so to speak, and a scholarship, if you wish. Najet Adouani had been part and member of the Writers in Exile program as well. So what will happen and what happens after these 3 years? Actually, some people don't stay the whole time, but they might go back home if the situation in their homeland has changed. You know, the conditions that led them to flee in the beginning, that might have changed, so they return early. So these are authors Or, for example, Ana Perez from Mexico, she also participated as a journalist in our program. Actually, she had a bulletproof vest. She had to wear that. Otherwise, she would not have been able to continue to live in her country. So, however, she was not actually persecuted by the government, but by a mafia-led organization in her country. So, maybe because of American pressure, this type of the mafia was actually eliminated. So Ana Perez actually then, given these different circumstances, returned to her country. But I think she continues to work under very similar and dangerous conditions. So another case. Somebody also returned early. He came from an Arabic country, and I'm not detailing which country he came from. He actually felt very suddenly a longing to be back in his country because he used to live in an extended family. Nevertheless, he had been imprisoned for 3 years in his home country. When he came to us, he actually was very much ready to talk about the situation, to talk to the public. He gave us a lot of information on the persecution waves in the country, the harassment that he had to face. But 1 year later, there was an event in Frankfurt, and I was really surprised because all of a sudden he really talked very positively about his own country, and it seemed he was here as a visitor only, a vacationist, if you wish. And it became very clear to me that he wanted to go back urgently because he missed his family, his kids, and he was ready to actually shut up, so to speak, politically. He was also not a very young man anymore, and I mean, this is something we can really understand. I wholeheartedly understood this. Of course, he missed freedom of speech. He would miss it in the future. He would not provide any kind of political statements anymore. But what about those who do not return, who would also not be or have peace of mind in terms of the political situation at home? And what would they do after 3 years of being in the program? Very often they would start applying for political asylum and normally also received it in a short period of time. It was not a problem. The authorities in Germany supported us and the authors of this country. With Najet Adouani, we are faced with a strange situation. Obviously, this procedure is going on, and there's no decision yet. So there's uncertainty. How come? I think it has something to do with a topical political situation in Europe. She comes from Tunisia, and the German Ministry of the Interior decided that the Maghreb would be a safe country of origin, and therefore this is something that means you cannot provide political asylum to people coming from this region or these countries. So I hope that this will be mended, because Tunisia is not really a clear-cut democracy, to put it that way. And there are not only government forces, but there is a large number of power centers and powerful groups in this country that can actually, have people suffer all kinds of reasons that we can think of, political reasons, religious reasons, etc. So there is a shift in the political framework that we are witnessing right now, and it does have a consequence on our program. And this is why we are turning to the politicians, the ministers, And we do also hope that in this case we will receive support, as we have done and received in the past, so that this case of Najet Adouani will be settled positively. Of course, it is also our task to actually provide individual accompaniment of the authors, and especially if it comes to their language and how they can continue to write in their own language. Yes, of course. Well, we also hope for the best, of course, all of us who are here. So we did hear that Najet Adouani is writing for everybody involved. She's finding new readers, and the last collection of poems is entitled The Desert of the Sea. There is also one poem that he is now quoting. This cannot be translated, unfortunately.
Im Land zwinkert ein Stern seiner Erwählten am Himmel zu. Gemeinsam sind sie zu mir aufgestiegen und haben meine Verse rezitiert. Hier wurde ich geboren, von hier aus habe ich mich aufgemacht mit den Augen eines Falken, mit den Flügeln einer Taube, mit einer Kehle aus Messing. Was ist das für eine Ausstattung, mit der ein Schriftsteller das Land verlässt? Die Augen eines Falken.
So the eyes of a bird, what is it actually? Is that a question? Yes, it's a question that he raises, but it refers to a poem that unfortunately we do not have a version of it in the booth.
This poem, it is like my hymn. Resume my feelings towards land, not that land which has borders, but that land, open land, and the bird is the freedom, my freedom. And when we are strong, we can protect our voices and the voices of others who lives in us, inside us. That's why I wanted to be that strong bird with the eyes of, and with the wings of column to hold peace and to hold strength in the same time, and to be able to protect your strong voice, which means the voices of others, the marginalized, and the people who have no power to scream. Nobody can hear them. And they are nesting here inside my heart. And I should be always afraid that I lose that voice. I should be always that bird traveling towards freedom and peace, but with strong wings.
Jordi Puntí, Josef Haslinger.
Jordi Puntí. Josef Haslinger actually reported on the situation where politics change, where all of a sudden there are difficulties that arise for the people who come to us and who want to live here. So yesterday, actually, we talked about translations, about change in culture, shifts in language. And you said that very often there is an obstacle because this is the language of bureaucracy that is so very difficult for people to tackle. And this is something people have to deal with, and they are not prepared.
Yes, yeah, I remember that. I was trying to stress out that, of course, we talk about refugees in the literary world, and we think of refugees who have a voice of their own and that can express, but actually there is another kind of refugee who doesn't have that, and who have to go to the bureaucracy, which is probably the biggest burden that every nation puts to stop people from getting in. I mean, the very Kafkian situation, right? The people has to get into a new country, and then not only is the difficulty of changing countries with all that it means, but also the fact that you have to go after all a system of bureaucracy, which is, I think Europe nowadays, it's a big bureaucracy system. And probably one of the things that should be simplified in order that refugees are welcomed in an easier way should be this thing precisely, the bureaucracy, the fact that you have to struggle to find your own way in a whole society. Right? That was ours. And also, because we were talking also about translation, how translation is so important nowadays, almost like a lingua franca. If you think, of course, everyone speaks English, almost everyone. We will see what happens if they decided to get out of the European community in a month, because then English will not be probably a language spoken in the European community. And but actually, when I think of a lingua franca, I don't think of English itself, but as the process of translating, the fact that everyone speaks more than one language in Europe, and this is a very normal thing, right? I remember traveling to Australia and talking to people, and they are mesmerized by the fact that in Europe you can travel, you take a car, you travel 6 hours, and you cross 4 countries and listen to 7 languages. And this is a very, very unique situation, and I think this is part of the value of being a European. And so I value also the fact that translation should be a very important process. And also, when I'm referring to the bureaucratic system, it's also entangled in these things, in the bureaucracy of languages, and how should be made much more easy, so people could be, received in a very normal way, I would say.
Mhm. Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. Coming back to the bureaucratic system, and Rasha Abbas from Syria actually made an observation, and she tabled a suggestion. She said language courses, integration courses should change. What would be important would be to be prepared for these types of bureaucratic endeavors. On the other hand, it would be important for migrants in Berlin to also learn the language in order to reject the drug dealers that come up to you, very openly and try and sell you the drugs. Well, Josef Haslinger, what would you say about this in terms of the language courses, German language courses? Do you actually make recommendations to the authors who come here to learn German language? Well, we are happy in that the Goethe Institute is actually accepting our authors as their students. They don't have to pay for the language courses. I mean, it is not any kind of obligation, but it is an urgent recommendation. And Najet Adouani also participated, and really her German language is really so much better than you would expect. Okay, nevertheless, it's a political issue as well. People say, okay, somebody who is coming to us, they should learn the German language. So I think you're cautious in that. Well, right, because it always depends a little bit on what they have in mind, what type of path they want to follow afterwards. In recent times, we have accommodated authors who come to us from country that have not learned English as a second language. It was not usual for them to learn English, so they don't speak English, so they don't speak German, nor do they speak English. And then this makes them get lost here. So actually, they need somebody to really be on their side and help them. For example, in order to find an apartment. I mean, normally they live in Berlin, Munich, Darmstadt, in larger cities. But they need somebody who takes care of our authors, and it has to be a 24/7 accommodation. There might be a case of emergency, and if you don't speak the language, well, you need somebody to be on your side. So this is why it's one step to make life simpler. Everyday life has to be worked out, how to go shopping, how to deal with the bills, with your pension system or whatever. So, yeah, it is good to go to take language courses, German language courses, but there are other things involved here. We don't want to obligate anybody, but we had an author from Abidjan. She spoke English very well. She didn't have the problem of getting lost here, no. And she also had the possibility to move on. And she wanted to move on whenever it would be possible. So she was not interested in attending any German language courses. She didn't have to because she was fluent in English, and it helped her without any problem. What is important for other authors is that it makes, German language courses makes life easier in your everyday life. Yeah, I mean, yes, to read German literature, this is, of course, a different story. And then you must have a special interest as an author to actually do so. There are some authors who would like to stay in Germany in the long run. Others don't have that perspective, and therefore they have to give an answer to the question of attending language courses in a different manner. So your program, Writers in Exile, also tries to get the authors together, especially when they stay in Germany, in order for them to create their own existence as an author in Germany, an exiled writer in Germany. And we heard the Belarusian guests say, well, we don't know anything like that. I mean, nobody can live on his or her writings.
В Беларуси у нас есть профессиональные авторы, которые занимаются исключительно литературой.
Professional authors living solely of literature. But there might be a problem. There is no market for art in Belarus. It might be a bit strange and not very civilized, but I don't think we won't have a market for art in the foreseeable future. And it's quite interesting to see that the authors who have left the countries continue to write in the Belarusian language is because they do it for themselves. They don't want to have readers in the countries where they live. They want to find readers in the country which they left. Maybe they believe they don't have anything interesting to tell, interesting things to the readers in their host countries, but I think the assimilation in the literary community is certainly difficult and not possible without an editor. If you start to write in a different language, you need an editor and you need a publishing house who have to help. So you need a kind of constructing assistance, and then he does no longer write in the language of the author, but in the language of the publisher. My colleague said that he didn't know how to express your love in a foreign language. I said, yes, you can do it with words and with the help of a dictionary. And with this, you opened a panorama. We have actors here, different levels, translation, literature, publishing. And if you have questions or would like to make a comment, you are now invited to do that. The topic of love, which was mentioned, brings me back to what Najet Adouani said on the manifesto which we heard she writes. I started to write in the garden of my mother. Now I'm writing at different places I love and which love me, where I found new readers and where I make new experience. How is this love expressed?
Since during these 3 years, I was a scholar of German pen, and I was lucky because they helped me and they supported me and they opened doors for my writing too. And I read my poems in many cities in Germany, Frankfurt, Hamburg, Marburg, Augsburg, Leipzig, many places. And there, during that, I met new people who like me, and I like them too. And it started a new relation between the new readers. And that, for me, a new love. Before, I have readers in Arab countries, a little bit in France and America, but now I have a lot of people here in Germany, and I'm very happy that I have people who read me now, and that push me to change, and from my future writing, and I went to the history and to the civilization here, and I saw the difference between some words, what it means in my civilization and in my country, and what it means here. And in my future writing, I will write for people who liked me, and I like them too.
Priya?
Thank you all very much for these really interesting perspectives into language and living in exile. I just want to come back to Thomas's little introduction with different quotes from different authors, because I think that speaks so much to how writer sensibility is formed from so many different sources. And we talked earlier about this idea of a homogeneous culture and how it doesn't exist, and it's the same with writing, that we write from so many different sources, all the things we've read and heard. And another quote came to my mind. I can't even remember who it's from anymore, but I think that's also how literature works and how culture works, that we don't always remember where things came from. And it's every writer becomes an exile simply by picking up a pen, and every reader becomes an exile simply by picking up a book. And I wondered about this. Of course, exile is a very problematic and painful and difficult condition in many ways, but I wondered about its productivity, in what sense it can be a useful condition to be pushed into for all of us, in some sense, to feel what it is to be alienated or to be pushed across some kind of border. And I wondered about how important that is for you as writers to seek to do that to your readers, and in which ways you think either literature can do that or you seek to do that in some sense.
Zmicier.
Сложный вопрос. Вот.
It's a very complicated question, but I will be happy to answer it. I've been invited to Germany very often, and I speak a bit Polish, and I'm fluent in Russian, and I speak the Belarusian language. I understand English, and I understand a bit of German, but I don't speak German. And I lived for a couple of months in Germany and didn't have any assistance, but I wasn't lost. It depends very much on the individual, of the person, how to feel. I worked at Tacheles, which was a very interesting experience as a writer and as an artist. And in addition to that, I believe that the Tacheles, which a lot consider to be an abscess in Berlin's body, that now after a certain period of time is perceived completely different. And if it will happen what's now happening with the refugees, I think that the Tacheles was still here would be very useful, because it might become an international project. What do I want to say by this? If I go to a different countries, I have a scholarship and don't know the language, but I work as a writer, and I love to work there as a writer. I am like in a shell and use my imagination and start to work. That is very individual. If I understood Priya's question correctly,
thank you. Since I came here, when I was in Tunisia, I work to feed my sons and to pay the rent of the house, and I work freelance because I'm not allowed to have the job by the system, and that took a lot of my time of writing, because I have to write 4 articles each night, and I translate books, and I do many things, and there is no time for writing. I take from my sleeping time to write. Now, during these 3 years, I have more time, and I wrote a lot. I wrote a novel. I wrote a book of poems. It is ready. And I wrote. Because you find yourself, you are free to write, to say what you want. You have the atmosphere for that. You feel safe. You feel yourself. And in Berlin, where I live, there is a beautiful park, and there is a garden of rose. Makes me always remember the garden of my mother. And there, I wrote many poems. And even where I lived for 3 years in the flat, it is a beautiful place and quiet place. And there is 2 trees. They were my friends. And from those two trees, there is 10 poems.
Josef Haslinger.
Josef Haslinger. I recently talked to an author from Yemen who is currently in Germany. He's not part of our program. He came with the so-called refugee wave to Germany. And he had to leave Yemen because he wanted to establish a publishing house, and he did that. And then there was a raid, and everything was destroyed, printing machines, computers, and everything. And he left the country and came to Germany. And I said to him, so it would be obvious to set up Arab publishing house in Germany, and they will probably you will find people to give you some startup money to do that. And he said, yes, it would be possible, but I prefer my books are published in Cairo, Beirut, in one of the real Arab countries. And I said to him, well, there are millions of people who speak Arabic in Germany, so they might need an Arab publisher here. So it might really be something for the future. But he didn't want to publish for immigrants. He wanted to publish in the future for his compatriots who had stayed at home, and he doesn't want to lose this contact. He doesn't want to integrate into a community of immigrants, to lose connection to his home country. It might be a possible option. Somebody who has not a perspective to return home might say, it's not that easy to change your language. That is awfully difficult. And language is not just language. It's not something that you technically learn, something new vocabulary, and then you open the dictionary and say, I love you, or whatever. It's also a form of life, which you take with you from home. And if you spend only for 1 year in another country and you come back in a certain situation, you suddenly the place comes to your mind where you used to live. It fit perfectly well, but no, it wouldn't be appropriate. And so you can experience it yourself, that life is also a form of living. The decision to change language is something that is hardly anything you can just decide to do. It requires an enormous effort, and it might fail, and then you will be in a no man's land. And then the other decision is, where do I find my readers? If I want to remain a writer, I need an echo. Literature functions only if there's an echo. You need a response. Somebody needs to read this. Otherwise, if you write for the future, it might be a possible project, but the desire that future would come soon, but not after I'm dead, I also perfectly well understand.
For the present too, that's what I was saying. I was not saying just only for the future. No, I want, if I may, I would like to add a couple of questions, only as a reader of immigrant, exile. No, please go on.
No, ich möchte jetzt,
I think the question by Priya Brazil, I understood differently. Priya, please, you don't need to correct yourself if I'm wrong, if I translate you wrongly, but in how far do you think, as an author, that your readers make also this experience of being alien, of alienation, that the experience that you have undergone becomes part of your text, and that your readers also can go through this experience by reading your text? That's the way I understood you.
In order to write, is there a sense in which a writer has to distance herself or himself from the familiar and from the known, and to venture much further, so to experience a kind of alienation, a kind of exile from the familiar? And then to what extent is that also the task of literature, to push readers, to take them somewhere else? And how far is that driving you as writers in your work, was sort of what I was hinting at.
Okay.
Sorry, I may answer only as a reader of exile writers, because I'm not an exile writer myself, and luckily for me, I can write at home very normally. But as a reader, there's something that comes to my mind. It's a quote from Émile Cioran, who says, there is a moment for the exile writer who have to choose between faith and humor in order to cope with the new situation. As a writer, you have to you will have faith in what you're doing, or will have some humor to distance yourself from what the situation you're living. Because every exile is unrooted from a place, goes to another place, and becomes, stops from being part of a collectivization, a collective, not a collectivization, sorry, and it's more like an individual, and you have to probably take decisions that normally in your country, in a normal literary situation, you wouldn't do, right? And that's the one. And the other one, it's also a quote from Josef, who said, "The form of the exile literature is tragicomedy." It has to be tragicomedy because there's a very deep part of you that writes from the other place, but there's also a part of you that writes from the present. And if you have any distance at all, which is the part of the comedy that gives you this distance, then it will be much more difficult. I don't know if Najet shares that.
You made, there is something you talked about when we write in our country, it should be different from what we write outside. For me, you read my poems in the book, the Green Book, Mirvista, and you notice there is poems were written in Tunisia, but I'm talking as a person who is longing to his country, and he's inside his country, and he feels that the foreigner, and he's in his country inside, and that is better than any thing else. When you are outside the country and longing to your country, that is normal. But when you are inside and you feel that you are not in your country, you are a foreign person, you are marginalized, you are in big prison, you are watched, you are raped, you are, you feel that place, it is your country, but you are not there. They took you and they thrown you outside, and you are looking for yourself there. That is really something hard to look for your country, and you are inside your land.
Die Situation hat sich gegenüber.
Yes, but the situation has changed. And especially taking into account what happened during the Second World War. Well, the desperate voices of German immigrants in the United States, if you recall that, because they practically did not have any German hinterland anymore. This is, a situation very different from what we know today. The German refugee, that's a short story, wonderful one, describing the situation of the German immigrant who is really desperate with the situation he's faced with. But today, the authors very often actually can keep in touch with the homeland through the internet, for example, and can also reach readers via this tool. And that leads to a strange turn of events in the situation. Just take a look at the Chinese Nobel Peace Prize winner, Nabo. He was in China, and actually, he published fora through the internet, and basically, he published in exile, but he was punished back home. So there is this twofold system. There was basically a village that he erected, that he created, and it really became a powerful tool. So basically, this is something that we are faced with in our modern world. And this is something, of course, that the dictators also have realized in the meantime. This is why so many bloggers are being charged now. Yes, but blogger, this is one one thing. It's not the authors, but very often we do hear about bloggers, and they do need our help. This is what people actually come to us, talk to us about. Why? Okay, so you have a writer, and there's a book, and an author is part of an international community, literary community. And therefore, if somebody an author is put into prison, then the government normally knows, there's going to be questions asked, there is going to be an outcry. Okay, so that's one thing. But the bloggers, they are anonymous people. They normally don't have any kind of support. They don't have any network to support them. So this is why they need our protection in particular. So we have some questions. I come from Chile, and I wanted to raise the following question. Is there any kind of publication or some kind of relationship between reader and authors, exiled authors, immigrants? All of a sudden they have to write their works in the exile. Of course, they receive inspiration. This is where they take up their work. Of course, they are being inspired by what they see abroad. But it is probably very difficult then to understand who the author is himself or herself, because, he came from a certain country, he's assimilating to a new country, and so assimilating or assimilation, that is also part of the communication vis-a-vis the reader. So what type of person are we talking about? It's difficult for the reader also to understand. I mean, does he write about a culture that is not our own anymore? Cortázar, for example, Argentinian writer, this is what he found. He was in France. The Argentinian readers were enthused about the work. But, they also had this... they were also a little bit angry because he was also, always in France. He had left Argentina. And so this is what he was accused of, not being an Argentinian anymore, but having turned into a Frenchman. So this is a twofold situation, but he said, okay, I did write my works in France, but, I always had the Argentinian perspective in mind. Yeah, this is, of course, a very important phenomenon of or losing your own culture. And, all of a sudden you come up with an intermediate position. Yeah, it can actually, the two things can happen. Some exiled writer returns to her home country, becomes minister of culture. Or, there are other forces that are developing, and some people, shy away from these authors who've turned into something else. Yeah, it happened with Germans as well. Another comment from the floor.
Small. Notice we are talking a lot about the authors and their link to their motherland, but we should remember that usually when the writer is pressed to exile, something happened with his motherland. It's completely changed. And usually we can say that we are taking this motherland in our suitcases into exile. And the very existence of the country, in the country, in its culture or language, can be even maintained only by those who are exiled. So they are keeping and protecting this country of complete disarray or even disappearance. They are the chance for the future.
Da das keine Frage war, nicken wir.
So this was not a question, really, and this is why we are just nodding our head. Another question or comment. I would like to take the opportunity to make two comments. First of all, my admiration, fantastic panel, great personalities from different countries discussing on this topic of cultural education, international cultural education, fantastic. But I would like to follow up on what we heard at the very beginning. There was a buzzword that was mentioned. Tilman Spengler said that actually he received notice by some press guy talking about the kerfuffle of the manifesto. So I understood that the public at large, and maybe also the media representatives, they are not so much in touch with the topics that are dear to our heart here. This might have something to do with prestige of language and culture in the public at large. I think it is not has not been recognized as something very important. There are other things that might not have been perceived the way they should be. So I recall a conference here in the Academy of Arts a couple of years back. This was a top-class conference supported by Bosch Foundation, and the topic was on the diversity of language. I remember this conference very well. Unfortunately, there was no echo resonating from that conference in the media, at least, unfortunately. But this is what we are faced with today as well, because here we're talking about the European context, the European diversity of languages and cultures. That is really the center, the core of this conference as well. So maybe there is just no resounding echo in the public at large. There's one other thing I would like to mention, something I find important as well. There is a course of studies translating literature at University of Düsseldorf. Actually, not many people know about it. It is difficult for the university to, for example, get funding, but I had been participating in this course of studies, or let's say in that project. Unfortunately, we had languages such as English, French, and Spanish getting involved there, and of course translating from these languages into German. So it's a specific course of studies there. But this is an enterprise that should also be supported. It deserves our assistance, thinking in terms also of other endeavors that I have in mind. I'm teaching at a university, Romanic languages, and there are those scientists at the university who actually also support our endeavor. Well, very briefly, okay, as to the kerfuffle, I mean, this was not that anybody said, okay, this is a conference that should not be. No, it was just, the manifesto was not well received in the press, in the media, okay? That's just a clarification. Nevertheless, thank you very much for your comment. And of course, the core of Europe is translating things, translation. And thank you very much for pointing out to us that there is a course of studies at the University of Düsseldorf. And yes, indeed, there are so many translators that have such an important task to shoulder. So thank you very much. Again, coming back to the kerfuffle. I'm a film producer from Film Rooms, World Rooms, and I would like to explain that term to you, or the name. Actually, the question was raised, can you actually express that you're in love with somebody in a different language? Actually, I stayed abroad for a couple of times, and it is always very difficult to really reinvent yourself in a different language. Cortázar, and the book that was mentioned by the previous Chilean speaker, this is about trying to incur or enter into that adventure of discovery, discovering other languages. And it is very important to first listen very closely. And I believe, this conference has great potential. There are like-minded writers who come together here with the potential to really explore what is foreign to them. And this brought to my mind the question, aren't there any projects where such an encounter is being enhanced? Well, okay, we have this conference right now, but I believe, I'm enthused about what I'm hearing, and maybe there could be a follow-up to that. So, you don't see the initiating group right now, but I think it is well received by the initiating group, this type of comment that you just made. Okay, so we've heard about the manifesto, and I think, it is a part of collaboration that we have had in mind, and that was a successful one. Yes, thank you very much. This is great conversation, and we are really touched by it, and it's of interest to us. So, however, I think that some of the topics that were raised here, or the opinions that were mentioned, some of these things were a little bit outdated to my mind, Second World War, Catalan literature, or whatever, in South America, etc. But I think, there are many, many people who have switched country and changed language. So I think there are many things. Or many authors like that. I've been living here for 30 years, and I have to live on something. So, okay, sometimes for fun, just for fun, I write in Croatian, my mother tongue. But then I wouldn't be able to live. But I have to earn my money here. I have to live in Germany. I have to write in German. So please let's not forget this pragmatic approach. I mean, yes, of course, we have a fantastic Bosnian author writing in English, now, American author basically. For the same reason he's writing in English. I mean, yes, you have to be pragmatic. He changed language, and just the way I did. So German and English, this is also an educational language. This is how we got educated in Croatia. We are not reading anything that we really get educational information on. No, it's, world literature that has been written in German language. And the authors are writing on the basis of these books. And this is why the myth of the mother tongue is a concept that, in the meantime, has become obsolete. Yes, of course, we are always saying, okay, certain types of emotions we cannot express. No, I disagree. When I was 26, I was able to say, well, hello, good day. But I'm also speaking other languages, and I learned by my children as well. And I learned, about the fairy tales, the children's songs, and all of this. I can ask my German friends whether, this article or that article is correct. But, that's only part of the story, and it's not only about, the articles. It's about emotions, and I can express my emotions as well, whether or not I use the right article. So the myth of the nation, this is something that we have addressed over and over again. I believe that the myth of the mother tongue is something, however, that has been around persistently, and it is being repeated time and again. I think it is not correct to say that we cannot express our feelings, emotions, and what have you in another language that is not your mother tongue. It depends, but I think you cannot be so absolute in what you're saying. Shakespeare actually knew so many more words than one of his contemporaries, and this is the same today as well. Maybe, contemporary fellow person, from my home country knows 6,000 words, and maybe I know more. But I believe that, therefore, that some of the things that we've heard about here are getting stuck in some kind of an outdated way of thinking. I believe that it would, well, I feel it's a threat actually, that somebody would come up and tell me, well, you are not a native speaker, you will never be able to speak like I will, and you will never be able to express what you want to say. No, I think that would be a threat, and I do believe that this is not the case. I mean, I'm using the German language here as well in order to express myself. I have to learn German, I have to use the German language in order to survive here. And I think this is a pragmatic approach. It's an existential question. Please consider it as part and parcel of our story. And there are new migrants who come here just in order to earn their living.
Das war mit viel Verve vorgetragen, allerdings möchte ich die Diskutanten...
This was very committed. I think it wasn't meant to be an accusation, because neither we spared pragmatism nor we celebrated the myth of Mother Tongue. The author who mentioned that she changed languages a couple of times throughout her life. If there are no further questions, we will now come to the love part of this afternoon. Books are written for the past, for the present, or for the future. And as we cannot look into the future, we do not know how important carrying your own language will be. So let's wait and see. We heard this today. Maybe one day we will meet a president of Syria speaking with a German accent, and we also learned that reading is a form of love. Outside you find the books of the authors, so let love speak and buy them. And Josef Haslinger wants to say something. It's a good news for Europe. The Austrian Chancellor has just resigned. Well, it's the question, who will be the new one? A literary effect. It's like a Shakespearean play. And with this, we conclude this panel. Thank you very much for the discussion and your contributions. And tonight, we will meet again at the Deutsche Theater and here tomorrow.
Wow.